Imagine a time when simply taking a sip of alcohol could mean risking your life, not because of any inherent danger in the drink itself, but because your government had poisoned it. The early 20th century was a period of profound social and political change in the United States. The country was grappling with issues of immigration, industrialization, and social reform. Amidst this turbulent backdrop, the temperance movement emerged as a powerful force. Advocates of temperance, who often framed alcohol as the root of many societal evils, successfully lobbied for the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1919, leading to the era of Prohibition. Proponents envisioned a nation where alcohol-related problems like domestic violence, poverty, and crime would be eradicated. But the reality of Prohibition was far from the utopia they imagined. To understand the extreme measures the government eventually took, it's essential to grasp the fervor behind the temperance movement. By the late 19th century, alcohol was deeply ingrained in American culture, but so were its negative effects. The temperance movement, led by groups like the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, argued that alcohol was destroying families and communities. These organizations were particularly influential in rural and religious communities where the consumption of alcohol was seen as both a moral and social failing. Their efforts culminated in the passage of the Volstead Act, which defined and enforced prohibition, banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. However, the law did not ban the consumption of alcohol, leading to an immediate and massive rise in illegal activity. People still wanted to drink, and where there is demand, there will be supply. Prohibition was supposed to eliminate alcohol from American life, but it quickly became evident that the law was unenforceable. Speakeasies, illegal bars that often required a password for entry, sprang up in cities across the country. These establishments were hidden in basements, back rooms, and other concealed locations, often under the protection of organized crime. Mobsters like Al Capone built empires on the black market alcohol trade, amassing fortunes and contributing to a surge in violence and corruption. Bootleggers, those who smuggled and distributed illegal alcohol, became notorious figures in American society. They found creative ways to produce and distribute alcohol, often evading law enforcement with ease. Some even concocted their own brews, using industrial alcohol meant for cleaning or manufacturing as a base. This was possible because industrial alcohol was not intended for consumption and was legally produced under the Volstead Act. However, industrial alcohol had to be denatured, made undrinkable by the addition of toxic chemicals, before it could be sold. But bootleggers quickly discovered how to remove these chemicals, making the alcohol drinkable again. The government's initial response was to increase enforcement and tighten restrictions on industrial alcohol. But this was not enough to deter the determined bootleggers and the thirsty public. Frustrated by the persistence of illegal drinking and the inability to enforce prohibition effectively, the government took a drastic step. In 1926, under the leadership of the Treasury Department, the U.S. government began adding highly toxic substances, including methanol, benzene, and other deadly chemicals, to industrial alcohol. This was done with the full knowledge that people were consuming these alcohols for drinking. The goal was simple and chilling: make the alcohol so dangerous that it would deter consumption. The consequences were immediate and horrifying. Within months, hospitals began reporting cases of severe poisoning. People who consumed the tainted alcohol suffered from blindness, paralysis, and even death. The government's own records show that by the end of Prohibition in 1933, an estimated 10,000 people had died as a result of this program. The most infamous of these cases occurred in New York City, where the death toll from poisoned alcohol was particularly high. In December 1926, just days before Christmas, 31 people died after drinking tainted alcohol. This spate of deaths sparked public outrage and brought the issue into the national spotlight. Newspapers across the country reported on the chemist's war, as the media dubbed it, leading to widespread debate about the ethics of the government's methods. The story of Mary Brewster, a 32-year-old mother of 3 from Chicago, is one of the many tragic cases from this period. Like many others, Mary was unaware that the alcohol she consumed at a holiday party in 1927 had been poisoned. Within hours, she became violently ill, suffering from seizures and losing her vision. By the time she was taken to the hospital, it was too late. She died within days, leaving behind her devastated family. Her story was reported to the local press, adding a personal face to the broader national crisis. Another notorious case involved a raid on a New York speakeasy in 1928. The patrons, unaware that the alcohol had been tainted, were drinking and celebrating when suddenly many of them began collapsing. By the end of the night, 19 people had died, and dozens more were hospitalized. The event led to public protests, with citizens demanding accountability from the government. However, officials were reluctant to take responsibility, arguing that the blame lay with the bootleggers who sold the alcohol. Public reactions to the government's actions were deeply divided. Some supported the poisoning program, viewing it as a necessary evil in the fight against illegal alcohol. They argued that the government had a duty to uphold the law, and that those who chose to break it by drinking illegal alcohol were taking their lives into their own hands. This perspective was particularly common among staunch supporters of Prohibition, who saw the deaths as tragic but ultimately justified in the name of a greater moral good. However, many others were outraged by the government's callous disregard for human life. The notion that the state would intentionally poison its citizens, even those engaged in illegal activities, struck many as a gross overreach of power. Critics argue that the program was not only unethical, but also counterproductive, as it did not stop people from drinking. Instead, it made drinking far more dangerous. Civil liberties organizations and some members of the medical community condemned the government's actions, calling for an end to the poisoning program and, ultimately, the repeal of Prohibition. The media played a significant role in shaping public opinion on this issue. While some newspapers supported the government's hardline stance, others published scathing editorials criticizing the poisoning program. Investigative journalists uncovered stories of government scientists who had expressed concerns about the safety of the program, only to be ignored or overruled by their superiors. These revelations fueled public anger and contributed to the growing disenchantment with Prohibition as a whole. Prohibition was officially repealed in 1933 with the passage of the 21st Amendment, which effectively ended the national ban on alcohol. By this time, the poisoning program had already been largely abandoned, as the public outcry and the program's evident failure to deter drinking had made it politically untenable. The end of Prohibition was met with widespread relief and celebration, as Americans eagerly returned to legal drinking. However, the legacy of the government's poisoning program lingers to this day. It serves as a dark reminder of the unintended consequences of extreme measures in the name of public policy. The episode also raised important questions about the limits of governmental power in regulating personal behavior and the ethical implications of using lethal force against one's own citizens. In reflecting on this period, it's clear that the government's decision to poison alcohol was not only a moral failure, but also a practical one. Rather than curbing drinking, the program made it more dangerous and further alienated a public already skeptical of Prohibition. It also contributed to a growing distrust of government policies, a sentiment that would resonate through the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. From a modern perspective, the government's actions during this period are both shocking and disturbing. The decision to poison alcohol reflects a broader pattern of paternalistic governance, where the state assumes it knows what is best for its citizens, even if that means resorting to draconian measures. The fact that thousands of people died as a result of this policy is a stark reminder of the dangers of governmental overreach. It's easy to condemn the government's actions in hindsight, but it's also important to consider the context in which these decisions were made. Prohibition was a time of great social upheaval, and the government was under immense pressure to enforce the law and maintain order. However, this does not excuse the deliberate endangerment of lives, particularly when less lethal alternatives were available. The lesson from this dark chapter in American history is clear. Public health initiatives and government policies must be guided by ethical principles, respect for human life, and a recognition of the limits of state power. As we face new challenges in the modern world, from the opioid crisis to debates over drug legalization, we would do well to remember the cautionary tale of Prohibition and the tragic consequences of the government's poisoning program. What do you think about the government's decision to poison alcohol during Prohibition? Was it a necessary measure in the fight against illegal drinking, or an unforgivable act of government overreach? Leave your comments here.